The air, thick with the brine of receding water, clung to me like a shroud. My boots sank slightly with each step into the slick, dark mud of the river crossing at low tide, cargo on my shoulders a familiar ache. This wasn't the clean, sterile gleam of a precinct office, nor the hollow echo of a courtroom. This was the gut of the city, the place where secrets festered and the tide washed in what the surface tried to forget. I moved with a practiced economy, each breath measured, each shift of my weight deliberate. The weight on my shoulders was more than just the ill-gotten gains of a night's work. It was the phantom limb of my past, a constant, dull throb. The killer, my failure. The man who had slipped through my fingers like smoke, leaving behind a trail of meticulously arranged devastation. They called him the sculptor, for the way he posed his victims, each tableau a macabre masterpiece. I'd seen them. I'd breathed in the metallic tang of their final moments, and I'd lost him. A glint of light, sharp and unnatural, broke the monotony of the gloom. It came from the far bank, where the reeds thinned and the skeletal fingers of a disused warehouse clawed at the sky. My gut tightened. It was too close, too deliberate. I paused, straining my ears. The lapping of water, the distant groan of a freighter, the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the prickle on my skin was unmistakable. It was the same sensation that had dogged me then, a sixth sense honed by too many late nights and too much blood. I adjusted the sack, its rough weave digging into my collarbone. The buyer was always here, a phantom of a man with a voice like gravel and eyes that saw everything. He paid in cash, no questions asked, and demanded the same in return. It was a transactional existence, a far cry from the righteous fury that had once fueled my days. I was a ghost haunting the fringes, a relic of a time when I believed in justice, in closure. The light flickered again, this time accompanied by a muffled thud. It wasn't the rhythmic clang of industry. It was precise, like something being carefully placed. The warehouse. It was abandoned, had been for years, a hulking shell of its former self. No one went there. Then a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. A low, almost melodic hum. It was faint, barely audible above the river's murmur, but it sent a shiver down my spine. The sculptor. He had a peculiar habit, a nervous tic that manifested as a low, tuneless hum when he was engaged in his artistry. My heart, a traitorous organ, began to pick up a frantic rhythm. This was madness. The sculptor was a ghost, a legend whispered in hushed tones. He was gone. I had to be sure. The weight on my shoulders felt heavier now, a dead anchor pulling me down. I changed course, veering away from the agreed-upon meeting point, drawn by an invisible, irresistible current. The hum grew louder, clearer as I approached the warehouse. It was accompanied now by the distinct sound of metal on metal, a delicate scraping. Peering through a broken window, a jagged shard of glass offering a distorted view, I saw it. Not a scene of violence, not yet, but the aftermath of something. Methodical. Tools, laid out with surgical precision on a makeshift workbench. And then my eyes fell upon the centerpiece. A discarded mannequin, its limbs contorted into an impassable, graceful pose. Beside it, a can of spray paint, the same stark white that had been the sculptor's signature. The hum stopped. The sculptor's calling card was not just the poses, but the subtle, almost artistic additions he made to each scene. A single, perfect bloom. A carefully placed feather, and now this. A flicker of movement caught my eye silhouetted against a grimy skylight, was meticulously arranging something at the mannequin's feet. Then it hit me. The meticulous planning, the sheer audacity. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a signature. My breath hitched. This was no coincidence. The sculptor was back, or someone was wearing his mask. And the weight on my shoulders, the cargo I carried, suddenly felt like a relic of a past I was desperately trying to outrun, but which had just caught up with me in the most terrifying way imaginable. The river crossing at low tide, cargo on my shoulders, was a place that smelled of secrets and decay. It always had. Even now, with the faint moonlight painting the mud flats in shades of bruised purple and bone white, the stench of rot and something metallic, something old, pricked at my nostrils. My breath hitched, a shallow, ragged thing. The weight on my shoulders wasn't just the canvas sack filled with whatever shoddy contraband I'd been paid to move. It was the phantom weight of years, of failures, of a darkness that still coiled in the marrow of my bones. My employer, a man whose face I'd only seen in the flickering gaslight of a darkside tavern, had been vague. "A package," he'd rasped, his voice like gravel grinding under a boot. "Deliver it to the usual drop. No questions." The usual drop, a phrase that tasted like ash. But the coin he'd pressed into my palm, heavy and cold, had silenced the usual protests. It always did. I reached the designated spot, a skeletal hulk of a derelict pier jutting out into the sluggish black water. Barnacles clung to its rotting timbers like ancient, festering sores. Here, the smell intensified, a cloying mix of salt, brine, and something else. Something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. The stranger. I'd never seen him before. He approached with a gait that was too fluid, too unnerving. My hand instinctively brushed against the worn leather of my jacket, a phantom itch where a badge used to be. "You brought it." The stranger's voice was a low murmur, barely disturbing the still air. It was a voice I'd heard before, though not in a long time. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He simply placed a small, heavy object on top. A tarnished silver locket, intricately carved. "This is for you," he said. "From our mutual acquaintance, he said you'd understand." I stared at the locket. It was identical to the one found at the scene of the first heist. My gut twisted. This wasn't just a job anymore. "What is this?" I managed, my voice rough. The stranger gave a low, almost imperceptible nod. "A reminder of what's to come." I was left alone, the river crossing at low tide, cargo on my shoulders now replaced by a weight far more profound. The locket felt impossibly heavy in my palm. It was a key, a taunt, a desperate signal, the heists, the pattern. It couldn't be a coincidence, not after all this time. My mind, usually a cluttered attic of regrets, began to clear. The fog of self-pity, of whiskey-soaked evenings receded. A familiar, almost forgotten, sharpness returned. The meticulous planning, the almost surgical precision of the crimes. It was him, or someone who knew him, someone who knew me. I walked away from the pier, leaving the sack of contraband untouched. The stranger had taken it, but he'd left me with something far more valuable, a purpose. A grim, dangerous purpose. I needed to know. The city loomed in the distance, a constellation of indifferent lights against the bruised sky. I knew the places they'd hit. The bank, the museum, the armored car. Each one a carefully orchestrated performance, a puzzle box of impossible security. My old instincts, long dormant, began to stir. The ache in my shoulders was gone, replaced by a different kind of burden, the burden of proof, the burden of a past that refused to stay buried. I would start asking questions, and this time I wouldn't stop until I had the answers. The thought was not comforting, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something akin to resolve. The locket. A cold, metallic promise pressed into my palm, a whispered echo from a past I tried to bury beneath layers of cheap whiskey and forgotten addresses. The one that had mirrored the signature of the Shadow Weaver, the phantom I'd hunted through the city's grimy veins, only to watch him vanish like smoke. My gut churned, a familiar, unwelcome guest. This wasn't just about stolen jewels anymore. This was about the ghost of my failure, resurrected. "What is this?" I managed, my voice a gravelly rasp. The stranger, a hulking silhouette against the bruised twilight sky, merely inclined his head. He offered no explanation, just the weight of the locket, a tangible tether to the nightmare. "It's a warning," he finally said, his voice a low rumble like stones grinding together. "Or perhaps an invitation." An invitation to what? I squeezed the locket, the intricate filigree digging into my skin. "Who are I?" "A collector of sorts," he replied, his tone as smooth as polished obsidian. "And I, Detective Cole, are a man with a unique set of skills that are becoming increasingly valuable." He gestured vaguely towards the docks, where the air hung thick with the scent of brine and decay. The city, I knew, was never truly quiet. It merely slept, and sometimes it dreamt of monsters. Days bled into a restless week. I haunted the usual haunts, the smoky backrooms, and the dimly lit bars where information, like cheap liquor, flowed freely. Then came the third. This one was bolder, more audacious. It wasn't a vault or a gallery this time. It was the municipal archives, a fortress of paper and ink, supposedly impenetrable. They'd taken specific documents, not for their monetary value, but for their historical weight. Records of old corruption, forgotten betrayals, the kind of secrets that could unravel reputations and topple pillars of power. The official channels were buzzing. Uniformed figures, sharp and unwelcome, swarmed the scene, their presence a stark reminder of the life I'd left behind. I watched from a distance, a ghost in my own former territory, the scent of police tape and sterile disinfectant a bitter perfume. My old contacts, those who still spoke to me, gave me wide berths, their eyes holding a mixture of pity and apprehension. My name, it seemed, was being whispered in the same hushed tones as the shadow weavers. I found a colleague, a young detective whose ambition outstripped his caution, lurking near the perimeter. He'd always been a bit too eager, a bit too keen to impress. He saw me and his eyes widened, a flicker of recognition, then something else, a nascent suspicion. "Cole," he said, his voice a little too loud. "What are I doing here?" "Just observing," I replied, keeping my tone deliberately neutral. "Heard about the break-in." He scoffed, running a hand through his neatly gelled hair. "Observing? This isn't my playground anymore, Cole. This is a high-profile case. We've got the brass breathing down our necks." "Anything interesting?" I pressed, feigning casual curiosity. He hesitated, then leaned in, his voice dropping. "They bypassed everything. Alarms, laser grids, pressure plates, like they knew the building's heartbeat. And get this," he lowered his voice further, glancing around. "They left another one of those lockets. Same design, same damn insignia." My stomach tightened. He was no longer content with mere theft. He was playing a deeper, more dangerous game, one that involved exposing the city's rotten core. And somehow I was caught in the crosshairs. The colleague straightened, his face hardening. "The brass are asking questions, Cole, about how someone with my history might know so much about these methods. They think IRER involved." The words landed like a punch. Involved. The very accusation I'd fought so hard to escape. I felt a prickle of unease, a sense of being trapped. I'd been drawn back in, not as a hero, but as a suspect. I was no longer just chasing a ghost. I was becoming one. That night, I found myself at the river, crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders. The mud sucked at my boots, the air thick with the metallic tang of exposed seabed. The stranger was there, a silent sentinel against the vast, indifferent expanse of water. He held out a small, worn, leather-bound book. "He's using the heists to flush out specific individuals," the stranger murmured, his voice barely audible above the lapping waves. "Those who benefited from the old corruption, the ones who thought they were safe." I took the book, my fingers brushing his. His skin was surprisingly cool. Inside, pages were filled with cryptic notes, names, dates, and what looked like intricate diagrams. "And you, Detective Cole, are about to become a very important piece in this collection." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I was being groomed, manipulated, used. The old instincts, long dormant, began to stir. This was more than a case. It was a war, and I was about to be drafted. The book lay open on the damp concrete, its pages whispering secrets under the weak glow of my flashlight. The stranger, his face a mask of shadows, watched me, his stillness unnerving. He'd called himself a collector, a curator of forgotten histories, and now he'd handed me the key to a haunted one. My fingers traced the spidery script, names blurring into dates, dates dissolving into what appeared to be coded instructions. It was a map, I realized, not of geography, but of human vulnerability. Each entry a carefully chosen mark, each transaction a meticulously executed crime. This wasn't random. This was a narrative, and I was holding the prologue. "Why?" I repeated, the question hanging heavy in the stale air of the disused warehouse. The stranger merely inclined his head, a gesture that could have meant anything from assent to dismissal. His eyes, when they caught the beam of my light, held a depth that suggested he'd seen more of this city's underbelly than I ever cared to. I focused back on the book. He was a phantom, a whisper in the wind, leaving behind only the hushed terror of his victims. And now, his methods, his signature, were resurfacing in a series of audacious heists that had the city on edge. My gaze drifted to a particular entry. A. Sterling, 08/14, Dark 7, Contingency Alpha, Sterling, the name snagged on a forgotten thread of memory. A financier, a man who disappeared without a trace a decade ago, his empire crumbling overnight. The official story was bankruptcy, a hasty departure. August 14th. It was the same date as the disappearance of the young woman I'd been investigating just before Sterling vanished. A coincidence? My gut, a seasoned detective's most reliable, most unwelcome advisor, screamed no. I flipped further. V. Petrova, 11/03, Old Mill, Contingency Beta. Petrova, a renowned artist known for her vibrant, almost aggressive use of color. She'd been found dead in her studio, an apparent suicide. The official verdict had been a tragic descent into despair. But I remembered the scene. The unnerving neatness of it all. Too neat. November 3rd. The same date, a prominent politician had been found dead in his car, a supposed heart attack, but with a peculiar lack of urgency from the responding officers. The targets weren't random. They were individuals connected, however tenuously, to events that had been buried, forgotten, or deliberately obscured. They hinted at more than just theft. They hinted at something else. He reclaims, he corrects. Corrects what? My voice was rough, catching in my throat. The air in the warehouse seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. The diagrams, once abstract, now pulsed with a terrible clarity. They weren't just blueprints for heists, they were plans for erasure. The stranger stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight catching the glint of something metallic on his wrist. A cufflink, perhaps, or something more functional. Injustices, wrongs that the system ignored, the powerful who stepped on the weak, he levels the scales. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of old cases, forgotten files. Sterling's disappearance, Petrova's death, the politician's untimely end. They were all anomalies, loose ends I'd been forced to cut, my hands tied by bureaucracy and a lack of concrete evidence. Her name was Anya. Anya Petrova. Stranger's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. It was the smallest of reactions, but in his carefully constructed stillness, it was a seismic shift. He said nothing, but the silence was more damning than any confession. Anya Petrova, the artist's daughter. The book was a ledger of revenge, a meticulously crafted indictment. They were a continuation, a final act. I looked from the book to the stranger, then back to the book. I had to know. I had to understand why Anya was on this list, why her name was inextricably linked to Sterling's. The river crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders. The cryptic note beneath Anya's name. What did it mean? What was the cargo? And why the river? But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that the lines between victim and perpetrator, between justice and vengeance, were as blurred and treacherous as the mudflats of the river crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders. The air hung thick and heavy, a damp shroud clinging to my skin. The scent of brine and decay was a familiar perfume in this forgotten corner of the city, a place where the river exhaled its secrets at low tide. I'd found him here, a ghost wading in the skeletal remains of a ferry terminal, the skeletal ribs of rusted cranes clawing at the bruised sky. The tide was out, exposing a slick, muddy expanse littered with the detritus of a careless world's splintered wood, a lone child's shoe, the bleached bone of a forgotten seabird. He stood silhouetted against the weak, watery sun, his shoulders hunched, not from the chill, but from the weight of unspoken things. Cargo on shoulders, the old saying went, and he looked like a man carrying more than just the small, canvas-wrapped bundle at his feet. He'd been evasive, a slippery eel in the murky waters of my investigation, but I'd cornered him, or so I thought. Anya Petrova, I answered, my voice a low rumble, cutting through the mournful cry of a distant gull. You know the name, you know what happened to her. His head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement. His face remained in shadow, a mask of indifference. But I saw it then, a tightening around the jaw, a subtle clenching of his fists. The same stillness I'd seen in the stranger's eyes. She vanished, just like the others. The pattern, it's the same, it all leads back. He finally looked at me. The eyes that met mine were like chips of obsidian, reflecting nothing but the harsh, unforgiving light. Leads back where, detective? The word was laced with a subtle mockery, a reminder of my fallen status. To him, I stated, my own gaze unwavering. The one who left his mark on this city, the one I helped. The bundle at his feet shifted, a deliberate movement designed to draw my attention. I ignored it, my focus locked on his face, searching for a crack in his composure. Help is a strong word, he mused, his gaze drifting to the exposed riverbed, the skeletal remains of boats half buried in the mud. Sometimes a man just provides a service, a delivery, a facilitation. Facilitation of murder, I spat, the accusation hanging in the salty air. I was his go-between. I moved things, people, I knew where they went. A low chuckle escaped him, dry and rasping. And I, detective, I know where they came from. The past has a long reach, doesn't it? It pulls I back, even when I think I've outrun it. He gestured with his chin towards the bundle. Curiosity killed the cat, they say, but satisfaction brought it back. I took another step, my hand instinctively reaching for the reassuring weight of my sidearm. What's in the box? He stooped, his movements fluid, unnervingly graceful. He picked up the bundle, the canvas taut over something solid within. He held it out to me, a silent offering. A token from a satisfied client. My mind raced. This was it, the proof, the link. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough canvas. But as my hand closed around it, he moved. Not with violence, but with a blinding speed that belied his stooped posture. He didn't attack me. Instead, he yanked the bundle back, and with a powerful two-handed shove, sent me stumbling backward. I lost my footing on the slick mud, my arms flailing for balance. I crashed down, the impact jarring through my bones. Before I could recover, he was already moving. He was fast, too fast. He disappeared behind a towering metal monolith, leaving me sprawled in the muck. I scrambled to my feet, spitting out mud, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The canvas bundle lay where he'd dropped it, a few feet away. I lunged for it, my breath catching in my throat. It was empty. A faint, metallic tang filled the air. It had been a diversion, a cruel, calculated piece of theater. He hadn't given me anything. He'd taken something, or perhaps he'd simply wanted me to think he had. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been played. Again. The tide was going out, and I was stranded, the true nature of the game still shrouded in the rising mist. The spray of the river crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders misted my face, cool and sharp against the rising heat in my chest. The stranger, a shadow cloaked in the twilight, had vanished as swiftly as he'd materialized, leaving me with nothing but the phantom weight of the canvas bundle in my hand. It was heavier than it looked, filled with... what? The scent of damp earth and something metallic, like old pennies, clung to it. I turned the bundle over, my fingers tracing the thick stitching. No markings, no identifying tags, just rough, woven fabric, stained with the grime of the docks. I'd seen this weave before, on the tarps used to cover machinery at the old shipyard. A small detail, perhaps, but my mind, ever hungry for patterns, snagged on it. The stranger's speed, though. It had been unnerving. Not the brute force of a dark worker or the wiry agility of a street thief. It was something else, a practiced economy of motion that spoke of discipline, of training. And his voice, when he'd spoken, a low rumble that vibrated in my bones, it had been familiar. Too familiar. I moved away from the water's edge, the exposed mud sucking at my boots. The moon, a sliver of bone in the bruised sky, cast long, distorted shadows. The heists. That's what had brought me here to this forgotten stretch of shoreline. Except this wasn't a serial killer, not in the traditional sense. These were calculated appropriations, not random acts of violence. They were targeted. I thought of the stolen artifacts, the antique sextant from the Maritime Museum, the intricate clockwork automaton from the private collector's vault, the rare botanical samples from the university's greenhouse. Each item seemingly disparate, yet linked by a subtle thread of historical significance, of forgotten craftsmanship. And the Ripper's signature, the carefully arranged displays of his victims, a macabre tableau of despair. The stranger's words replayed in my head. "Ire looking in the wrong place, Cole. The past isn't the prison I think it is." He'd said it with a strange kind of pity, as if he understood the weight I carried. As if he'd seen the ghosts that danced in the periphery of my vision, the faces of those I couldn't save. I found a discarded crate, its wood splintered and salt-bleached. Sitting, I untied the knot on the canvas bundle. My breath hitched. Inside, nestled amongst packing straw, were not stolen goods, but tools. Delicate, gleaming instruments, fine-tipped scalpels, intricately carved bone probes, miniature saws that glinted under the weak moonlight. They looked less like instruments of crime and more like surgical implements. But not for flesh, for something else, something delicate. Then I saw it. Beneath the tools, a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were brittle, yellowed with age. I opened it, the scent of old paper and dried ink filling my nostrils. The handwriting was elegant, precise, a stark contrast to the rough exterior of the bundle. It was filled with observations, sketches, diagrams of complex mechanisms, and detailed notes on the properties of rare materials. It wasn't a confession or a plan of attack. It was a meticulous research log. A name, scrawled at the bottom of a page, filled with intricate drawings of gears and springs, made my blood run. It was a name I hadn't uttered in years, a name buried deep beneath layers of regret and self-recrimination. A name tied to the very case that had broken me. The Ripper's victims. They weren't random, not entirely. They were chosen for their unique qualities. Their resilience, their unusual physical attributes, their almost supernatural ability to endure hardship. The Ripper wasn't a killer driven by bloodlust. He was a collector of specimens, and these tools. These weren't for dismemberment, they were for preservation, for dissection, for study. The stranger hadn't been a thief, he'd been a courier, and this journal, it was the Ripper's, or rather the Ripper's apprentices. The one who had learned the craft, who had continued the work. My mind reeled. The heists weren't about acquiring wealth or fame. They were about acquiring the components for something the Ripper had started, something his successor was now finishing. The stranger's words echoed again. The past isn't the prison I think it is. He knew. He knew what I was searching for. He knew what I feared. My gaze drifted back to the river crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders. The silhouette of the city skyline, usually a comfort, now seemed like a jagged scar against the horizon. The stolen items, the Ripper's legacy, the stranger's cryptic message, it all coalesced into a terrifying, singular truth. The Ripper hadn't been caught because he was more than a killer. He was a craftsman of the macabre, and his work, it seemed, was far from over. The meticulous planning of the heists, the specific nature of the stolen items, the tools found in the bundle, they pointed to a single, horrifying conclusion. Someone was continuing the Ripper's research, not to replicate his crimes, but to perfect them, to build something, and the stranger, he was part of it, a keeper of the secrets, a guardian of the legacy. He had shown me the path, but not the destination. The true horror wasn't the past. It was what was being built in the present, with the echoes of that past as its foundation. I wasn't just chasing ghosts anymore. I was staring into the face of a meticulously crafted, horrifying future. The salt-laced air, thick with the smell of brine and decay, clung to me like a second skin. The river crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders, was a familiar ghost, a place where secrets were whispered on the wind and bargains struck in the hush of receding water. The stranger's words, cryptic as they were, echoed in the vast emptiness left by his departure. They know Ire looking. This is just the beginning. A beginning. The words tasted like rust and regret. My own beginning, a lifetime ago, had been a cascade of failures, a monument to my own blind spots. Now, it seemed, the past was determined to revisit me, dragging me back into the muck I tried so desperately to escape. I turned from the water's edge, the mud sucking at my boots with a greedy sound. The canvas bundle the stranger had left behind was still clutched in my hand, its weight a sudden, unexpected burden. I'd expected a clue, a breadcrumb to lead me through the labyrinth. Instead, I was left with a tangible reminder of this shadowed game. Back in my cramped workspace, the harsh glare of the single bulb did little to dispel the gloom. I laid the bundle on my scarred workbench, the worn canvas groaning under the light. My fingers, clumsy with a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years, fumbled with the knot. It loosened, then gave way, revealing not contraband, but something far more unsettling. A single, tarnished silver locket. My breath hitched. It was old, intricately engraved with swirling patterns that seemed to writhe under my gaze. I knew this locket. I knew the delicate clasp, the faint scent of lavender that still clung to the metal. It was hers, my wife's. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a declaration, a threat, They hadn't just found my trail, they'd walked right into my past and plucked out a piece of my soul. I opened the locket. Inside, 2 faded photographs stared back. My wife, her smile radiant, her eyes sparkling with a life I'd lost. And beside her, a younger me, a man who hadn't yet learned the bitter taste of failure. This was no random act. This was personal. The perpetrator knew. They were raising the stakes, forcing me to choose between the ghosts I chased and the fragile present I still held dear. My gaze fell on a small, folded piece of paper tucked behind the photographs. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The script was precise, almost elegant, a stark contrast to the violence it implied. The harbor master. He knows too much about the tide's secrets. I have until dawn, Cole, or the next cargo will be unscheduled. The harbor master, old man Hemlock, with his gruff exterior and eyes that missed nothing. He was a fixture at the docks, a man who'd seen more than his fair share of illicit dealings, a silent witness to the city's undercurrents. He was also a friend, a man who'd offered me quiet support when the world had turned its back. Dawn. The clock was ticking, each second a hammer blow against my resolve. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about survival. Their survival. My survival. I grabbed my coat, the worn leather familiar and comforting. The smell of the river crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders, still lingered in the air, a grim premonition. The game had changed. The stakes had been raised to a level I hadn't dared to imagine, and I was no longer just hunting a ghost. I was racing to save a life. Not this time. The salt-laced air bit at my lungs, a familiar sting that always preceded trouble. Old man Hemlock, his face a roadmap of weathered lines, had pointed me towards the river crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders. "They're moving something big tonight, Cole," he'd rasped, his voice like pebbles grinding together. "Something they don't want the daylight seeing." He'd handed me a crumpled sketch, a crude drawing of a stylized raven, the same mark left at each scene. My stomach had tightened, the mark of the ghost. Now the river's skeletal ribs lay exposed by the receding tide. Mud, thick and black, sucked at my boots with every step. The air hung heavy, pregnant with anticipation, a stillness that screamed danger. I moved like a phantom myself, a shadow against the skeletal remains of long-forgotten ships. My own cargo was light, a silenced pistol, a handful of carefully chosen tools, and a gut feeling that was screaming louder than any siren. The ghost. The name still tasted like ash on my tongue. I'd thought him gone, a nightmare banished by the dawn. But the raven mark, blooming again on the city's underbelly, proved me wrong. This wasn't just about stolen goods. It was a performance, a twisted echo of the past. And I was the only one who recognized the symphony of destruction. My mind replayed the crime scenes, each detail etched into my memory like a scar. It wasn't about brute force. It was about intellect, about understanding the system, and then dismantling it, piece by agonizing piece. That's what made him so terrifying. He was a ghost in the machine, and I was just a man trying to plug the holes. The targets, the timing, the sheer audacity of it all. It was a pattern, subtle but undeniable. He was escalating, growing bolder. This latest move, whatever it was, felt like a crescendo, and I needed to be there to conduct the final, deadly movement. A hulking freighter, its silhouette a hulking beast against the bruised twilight sky, was darked further down. This was it. The air vibrated with an almost palpable tension. I could feel the prickle of unseen eyes, the low hum of hushed voices. They were here. I found my vantage point behind a cluster of rusting barrels, the metallic tang of decay filling my nostrils. The plan was simple, almost foolishly so. The ghost was arrogant. He reveled in his own cleverness, in the sheer impassibility of his feats. He expected a chase, a futile attempt to apprehend him. He didn't expect me to anticipate his next move, to lay a snare where he expected a chase. 2 figures, cloaked and silent, disembarked, their movements economical and practiced. They carried heavy sacks, their shoulders bowed under the weight. The raven mark, it was on the sacks. My heart, despite my best efforts, gave a traitorous thump against my ribs. I waited. Patience was a virtue I'd learned the hard way, often through bitter failure. The ghost wouldn't rush. He'd be methodical, just like always. He'd ensure his escape route was clear, his spoils secured. And that's where I'd intercept him. Not in a desperate Hollywood-style shootout, but with a quiet, decisive intervention. One of the figures paused, head tilting as if listening. My breath hitched. Had they heard me? The figure relaxed, and they continued their work. They were loading the sacks onto a smaller, more maneuverable boat tied to the freighter's hull. A sleek, black vessel, built for speed and stealth. I recognized it. Hemlock had mentioned seeing it lurking in the periphery of the docks for weeks. It was the Ghost's escape pod. This was my moment. I slipped from my cover, moving with the quiet urgency of a predator. The distance between us was closing. I could make out more details now, the lean build of the figures, the way they moved with an unnerving synchronicity. They were professionals, undoubtedly, but they were also predictable. My hand tightened around the cold metal of the pistol. This was more than just stopping a heist. This was about redemption, about finally closing the book on the Ghost and on the ghosts that haunted me. The figures were almost finished loading. Then, a glint of metal. One of them produced a small, intricate device, plugging it into a port on the side of the freighter. A faint, electronic hum filled the air. It wasn't just about moving cargo. They were disabling something vital. A new piece of the puzzle, sharp and unwelcome, slid into place. The Ghost wasn't just stealing, he was sabotaging. My trap was set, but the game had just become infinitely more dangerous. The river crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders, was a skeletal landscape under a bruised moon. The air hung thick with the smell of brine and decay, a scent I knew intimately, a perfume of desperation. Old Man Hemlock's words echoed in the hollow chambers of my mind. "They're moving something big tonight, Cole." His gnarled finger had jabbed at the dark, slick expanse of mudflats, a place where secrets went to drown. My boots sank with each step, the mud a greedy maw trying to swallow me whole. The low tide had peeled back the water's skin, revealing a treacherous terrain of exposed rock and rotting seaweed. The wind, a mournful banshee, whipped strands of hair across my eyes. I moved with a hunter's stealth, my senses stretched taut, every shadow a potential threat, every ripple in the distant water a sign. A glint of metal caught my eye, a faint, unnatural gleam against the dull muck, not rust. This wasn't just smuggling. This was the signature. The same brutal efficiency, the same meticulous, almost artistic preparation. I moved faster, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The vast emptiness of the riverbed amplified the pounding in my chest, a rhythm I'd tried to outrun for years. Ahead, silhouetted against the faint glow of the distant city, were shapes, figures, hunched and purposeful, wrestling with something large and unwieldy. One of them, larger than the rest, paused, his head tilting as if he'd heard something I hadn't. A prickle of unease skittered down my spine. I flattened myself against a barnacle-encrusted pilaster, the rough stone biting into my cheek. Then the larger figure straightened. He turned, his silhouette sharp against the sliver of moon, and I saw it. The way he held his head, the almost imperceptible twitch of his left shoulder. The same subtle mannerisms that had haunted my nightmares. It couldn't be. After all this time, after I'd buried him along with my own career. My breath hitched. The air felt thinner, harder to draw. This was him, the phantom, the one who'd slipped through my fingers like smoke, leaving a trail of shattered lives in his wake. He was here, orchestrating this just as he had orchestrated everything before. I emerged from my cover, my voice a low growl that surprised even me. "It's over." The figures froze. The cargo, whatever it was momentarily forgotten. Heads snapped in my direction. The large figure, the one I now knew, turned fully. Even in the dim light, I could see the cruel curve of his smile, a predator's grim satisfaction. "Cole," he responded, his voice a silken rasp that sent a shiver of ice through me. Always the detective, even when I read just this. He gestured vaguely at my rumpled clothes, my haunted eyes. "I know why I'm here," I stated, my gaze locked on him. "Oh, I think I do," he purred, taking a step forward. The others, his hired hands, began to fan out, their movements no longer the smooth coordination of laborers, but the menacing spread of a trap. "I came for the show, and the show is just getting started." He nodded towards the bulky object they'd been struggling with. It was a reinforced crate, its metal clasps glinting. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. The final act, Cole, the masterpiece. This wasn't just about stolen goods. This was about chaos, about making a statement, and the methods, the sheer audacity. It was the same intricate, terrifying dance he'd performed before. "You won't get away with it," I vowed, my hand tightening on my weapon. He shrugged, the gesture infuriatingly casual. "Who's to say I already haven't? You're here, aren't you? Alone, facing me. That's a win in my book." One of his men lunged, a crude knife flashing in the moonlight. I reacted instinctively, the years of training kicking in. The shot echoed across the river, a deafening crack that shattered the night. Chaos erupted. The remaining men, startled but not deterred, surged forward. I moved, a whirlwind of controlled fury. My pistol barked again, then again. Each shot found its mark, a testament to a skill I'd tried to suppress, a part of me I'd tried to kill. But there were too many. They pressed in, their faces contorted with a primal rage. I felt a sharp blow to my ribs, sending a jolt of pain through me. Another man grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. I twisted, elbowing him hard in the jaw. Through the melee, I saw him. The perpetrator. He wasn't fighting. He was watching, a spectator at his own macabre play. The pipe swung in a wide arc, aimed at my head. I ducked, the wind of its passage a tangible force against my ear. The impact of the pipe striking the ground where I'd been sent a tremor through the earth. This was it. The ghost of my past, made flesh and blood, standing before me on this desolate shore. The stakes were no longer just about stopping a crime. They were about reclaiming a piece of my shattered soul. The pipe clanged against the wet concrete, a dull, resonant thud that vibrated up my arm, even from the floor. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the echoing cavern of the abandoned warehouse. The man who wielded the pipe, a brute with eyes like chips of obsidian, snarled, his muscles bunched, ready for another swing. But the moment stretched, taut and brittle. He hadn't expected me to be so. Still, I'd anticipated the wild, panicked lunge. Instead, I dropped, a move honed by years of instinct, a ghost of my former life. The wind of the pipe's passage had been a whisper of what could have been, a stark reminder of the razor's edge I walked. Now, the brute's surprise was a chink in his armor, a fleeting vulnerability. My gaze flickered to the cargo on my shoulders, the heavy duffel bag that represented everything. It was the leverage, the proof, the key. I shifted my weight, the rough canvas digging into my skin, a familiar ache. This wasn't the open expanse of the river crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders, where the world felt vast and indifferent. This was a cage, albeit a large one, and the walls were closing in. "It's over," I rasped, my voice rough with disuse and the lingering adrenaline. "It's all over." The brute hesitated, his obsidian eyes darting to the duffel bag, then back to me. He was a pawn, I knew it. A hired fist, paid to do a dirty job. But the mind behind the operation, the one who orchestrated these chillingly precise heists, was still out there, a phantom I'd been chasing for too long. It was the sound of intellect, sharp and cruel. "Over," the voice purred, laced with amusement. "My dear Cole, it's only just begun." The brute lunged again, but this time I was ready. I rolled, the duffel bag a shield against his clumsy attack. I scrambled to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest. "You think this is a game?" I spat, circling him, my eyes never leaving his. "You think you can play with lives like this? Lives are merely currency." The brute's hand was reaching inside his jacket. I didn't wait to see what he pulled out. I charged, not with the pipe, but with a desperate, calculated shove. He stumbled, his balance thrown, and I was on him, driving his back towards the loading bay. The sound of sirens grew louder, symphony of impending justice. I tipped off the authorities, of course. A calculated risk, but one I had to take. The brute roared, struggling against me, but his strength was waning, his resolve crumbling. The promise of freedom of escape had evaporated with the wail of the approaching law. He went down with a grunt, the duffel bag tumbling from my grasp. I didn't pursue him. The sirens were deafening now, their flashing lights painting the grimy walls in strobes of red and blue. The brute was subdued, his fight extinguished. The duffel bag lay open, its contents spilled across the floor, stacks of bearer barns, jewels that glinted even in the dim light, and a small, leather-bound journal. I picked up the journal. It was filled with meticulous notes, dates, locations, and names. Not a ledger of stolen goods, but a meticulously crafted blueprint of a broken system. But they weren't the work of a madman. And the serial killer, the phantom that had haunted my nightmares for years. They were a carefully constructed facade, a smokescreen designed to distract, to divert attention while the real prize was being amassed. He had used the fear of a monster to mask his own insatiable greed. A man in a uniform, his face grim, approached me. "Cole, are I all right?" I nodded, the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. The resolution wasn't just about catching a thief. It was about confronting the ghost that had driven me, the guilt that had festered. It was about understanding that sometimes the monsters we fear are just elaborate disguises for something far more mundane and far more dangerous, human avarice. I looked at the spilled contents of the duffel bag, the tangible evidence of a meticulously planned deception. The river crossing at low tide, cargo on shoulders, had been a place of escape for him, a fleeting moment of freedom. Now, his carefully constructed empire was crumbling, exposed in the harsh light of a warehouse at dawn. No one's getting out. I met his gaze, a faint smile touching my lips. "Good," I added, my voice steady, "because I don't think he's going anywhere." The final chapter was closing, not with a bang, but with the quiet, satisfying click of a lark. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of peace. The past was still there, a scar on my soul, but it no longer defined me.